If you've never been arrested before, what happens next might surprise you. Watch this video to learn everything from the time the bracelets come out until the time you go see the judge. All right, I want to start this video with a little bit of a warning, okay? And that is if you are encountered by the police and they say you're under arrest and they want to arrest you, don't fight with them, don't resist them, don't run away. In every one of those situations, you're just going to make everything worse. The place to fight about your case is in court. To do so on the street is just going to subject you to more charges, more trouble, and probably put the underlying case in jeopardy as well. So with that out of the way, let's get into the main video. All right, so let's get into this. So now you've been arrested, probably had the handcuffs placed on you. You're going to be cuffed behind the back. This is for the safety of the officer usually, and then you're going to be searched. This is a little more intrusive than what they call a pat-first search, where they're just searching the outside of your clothing. In this type of search, they're actually going to search you head to toe, with your clothes on, of course, but they're going to empty out your pockets, maybe turn them inside out. And what they're looking for in this type of search is to see if you have, first and foremost, anything related to the crime for which you're being arrested, that evidence. They can do this as what they call search incident to arrest. They're also looking for weapons that you might have on your person, or contraband like drugs or hypodermic needles or anything like that they don't want being brought into the police station by you. They want that separate from you as they're going to arrest you. At this point in time, many times, but not always, the officer will give you Miranda rights. Now you've been placed under arrest, so they give you the Miranda rights. Most everyone by now has heard them on TV or someplace else. You have the right to remain silent. You have the right to an attorney. If you want, if you want the attorney with you during questioning, you have the right to stop questioning anytime. Those typical Miranda rights will be given to you usually at this time, but not always, okay? After this happens, you'll be placed in the police car for transport to the police station. And this is usually where many people get a little chatty, okay? And I'm gonna counsel against that, all right? And you start maybe getting a little bit more comfortable with the situation. Maybe the officer is not being as much of a jerk to you now, and they're just trying to strike up a conversation with you. And this is a really bad idea. You want to say as little as possible. Now, there are going to be times during this process which you're going to be required to speak in some manner, but you don't have to say anything about the case itself. And quite frankly, you shouldn't be talking too much at all. If this is a drunk driving case, and they're recording this in particular, the more you speak, the more evidence they're going to have potentially if you're slurring your speech, or maybe the officer can smell the alcohol more as you speak. So the idea is, when you're in the back of that police car being transferred back to this police station, you really should say as little as possible. Don't strike up a conversation. Certainly don't engage in conversation with the officer. All right, so when you get back to the police station, this is where the booking process is going to begin, okay? You're going to be brought to a particular room. They typically call this a booking room. Many times these things are audio and video recorded. Sometimes it's video recorded, but just know you're being watched, not just by the officers and people there, but in many cases these days by some form of a camera. So again, you want to be careful of what you say, what you do, how you move. Just know you're always being watched, okay? But part of the booking process is going to be pretty straightforward and not a big deal, okay? They're going to want to do things like they're going to take your picture, okay? They're going to fingerprint you. They're going to then ask you a bunch of questions. Now, remember before in the last section I talked about there's going to be certain times you're going to need to speak to the officers. This is what I'm talking about, right? They're going to want to get some basic information from you. Many times they'll get some of this off your license or other identification, but they're going to ask you some simple questions. What's your name? What's your date of birth? Maybe your social security number. What's your address? Are you married? Do you have kids? Basic biographical, that type of information. Are you working? That type of stuff they're going to ask you. And these questions are okay for both of them to ask and for you to answer, okay? Many times it's also at this time that the police officers will give you Miranda rights. Many times, like I said, they don't give you Miranda rights right after you're arrested and put into the police car. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. But many times it's here back at the station that the booking officer is going to do that, and they want to ask you any additional questions or more questions about the offense itself. Those questions about your biographical stuff, like your name, address, date of birth, social security number, those don't count. Those are what we call standard booking questions. And that's part of what the booking process is going to be about. Sometimes you're going to be questioned more about the events of what brought you there, and it could be, quite frankly, any type of crime. And sometimes they want to question you about it. Sometimes they don't care to question you. But in any event, they're probably at this point in time going to read you your Miranda rights, possibly again, maybe ask you to sign a form indicating that they did give you your Miranda rights, just in case it comes up later in court to challenge anything you might say there back at the police station or during the booking process. All right, now, if this is a drunk driving case, there's going to be a couple of other elements that might not be present in many other cases. And since we do a lot of drunk driving cases here, and I think it's a pretty common crime, we're going to talk about that as well. And one of the things they're going to do that might be different from, say, an assault and battery case or something like that back at the station is they're going to offer you what they call a breathalyzer test or a breath test, okay? And that is where they, I'm sure most people generally know what it means, but basically there's a machine they have there that will basically register an approximation of your blood alcohol content, how much alcohol you have run through your bloodstream, based upon a sample of your breath. So there's requirements for this. The person, first of all, they have to have a machine that's been properly certified and calibrated. The operator of the machine has to have been trained on the breath test machine. Actually, that person has to be certified. And then there's other requirements, such as they have to watch you for 15 minutes straight prior to the having the breathalyzer test be taken. This is so that to make sure you're not like burping anything up or eating or drinking anything just prior to taking the test. But this might be something they ask you to do, and this would always be during the booking process after an arrest for drunk driving. Our standard answer to whether or not you should take the breathalyzer test is always no, you should refuse that. But of course, as we've said in other videos, that will come with certain things like a license suspension is going to come up as a result of that. But it's still better for your case in general. So that's one additional step that you might have if this case is a drunk driving case. Another thing that's going to happen during the booking process is the police are going to take that other information you gave them earlier, your biographical information, and they're going to go through the database and run your record, okay? They want to see if you have any prior criminal record. They also want to see if you have any outstanding warrants. What that means essentially is that maybe some other court in the state of Massachusetts or some other department in the state of Massachusetts, police department, or some other law enforcement agency someplace else, or some other court someplace else, has put in the system a warrant for your arrest, okay? And that can take many forms. We have what we call a straight warrant, which is just where they've issued charges, but you haven't been to court yet. And then we have what we call default warrants. Like, so let's just say you do have some kind of a criminal record or other case out there, and you were supposed to go to court on a particular day, but for whatever reason, you decided not to show, okay? There would be a warrant for your arrest by that court. They call it a default warrant because, as the name suggests, you defaulted on your obligation to go to court. Part of the reason they do this is to see whether or not you're going to be released on the evening of your arrest or at some other time. Let's assume, for the sake of argument, that you don't have any warrants that would preclude you from being bailed. The next step in the process after being arrested is the police officer is going to call what we call a bail commissioner. Okay, these people are typically a clerk magistrate or assistant clerk magistrate at the local court, and they have one on duty pretty much 24/7 to make these determinations when the court is not open, okay? And the clerk magistrate will usually come down to the police station. They might review the police reports or talk to the police about the circumstances of the particular offense. They're going to review any record that you do have. You might not have any record, any record you do have, and they will make a determination, okay? Many times they will just, if you have no record and it's not a super serious offense which you've been arrested, many times they make a determination that you can be released on essentially no bail, maybe some conditions, things like that. But they also have the ability to set a bail. So say, hey, listen, you know what? Because of the seriousness of this case or because of something you did in the past, it's on your record, that we're going to let you go on some kind of bail, but it's going to be something you have to pay. And that sort of brings me to the question of what is bail, okay? Bail is essentially nothing more than a security deposit that you're placing to say, hey, listen, I'm going to come to court when I'm told to do so, and if I don't, I might forfeit this money. That's really all bail is. And the bail commissioner essentially is the person to set that bail and to take that bail in the circumstance when you've been arrested. Okay. So many people are able to be bailed on the very evening they get in there. So very typical on, say, a drunk driving case where there was no injury or accident, nothing serious, and no warrants being held against the person. They'll call the bail commissioner down almost immediately. They get through the booking process, and usually an hour or two after, that person might be released on either no bail or very low bail. But in every case, the bail commissioner, this is how they get paid. They get paid a $40 fee for coming down there and doing this paperwork and letting the person out on some type of bail. And so you might have to pay that $40 fee, but essentially that's being let go on your own personal recognizance or promise to appear and abide by any conditions they set. Okay, when I say promise to appear, I mean promise to appear in court. The bail commissioner is also going to say, okay, you need to go to court on this case, and they will set a date and time for this. Many times that date and time is the very next day. Sometimes that date and time is maybe a couple of days away, depending on the circumstances. Again, if it's like a Friday night, obviously court couldn't be before Monday morning. But in many cases, even if it is during the week, they might say, okay, you don't have to go tomorrow, but you have to go the day after tomorrow. So they set those particular terms. All right, so let's talk about a case where they say you cannot be bailed, okay? The bail commissioner, either due to the circumstances of the particular offense, maybe they're super serious, someone got seriously injured. And again, this could be anything from a drunk driving case with a serious accident to some form of an assault and battery case or a shooting or something like that. And the bail commissioner might say, yeah, I don't feel safe in any circumstance releasing this person. So they're going to be held for court. In other words, they're not going to go home no matter how much money they put down until until they're able to go to court. And that does happen in certain cases. I will also say that in certain cases, even if they are going to set bail, there's a cooling off period. A particular example of this would be a domestic violence case. In any domestic violence case, if the person who's been arrested, even if the bail commissioner is going to set bail, there's essentially a 6-hour cooling off period before that person is going to be released. That again is for the safety of the alleged victim in the case, but that's one of the things that would be determined at the time of the arrest and the bail commissioner setting that particular bail. But let's talk about the case where that person, the bail commissioner says there is no bail. Okay, so what do we do with you in that particular circumstance? Okay, if it's, say, a Monday or a Tuesday, basically anytime during the week, and it's nighttime essentially, you're going to be kept at the police station that night, and then the police will just transport you to the court along with your paperwork and property the very next morning. They're going to take you to the local district court to be arraigned on the charges, and they'll file the charges at that point in time. But what about a circumstance where, say, it's a Friday night, right? Say it's Friday night, court's not open until Monday. I've seen it go both ways, where sometimes the police department will house you in their jail cells over the weekend and then bring you to court on Monday. That can happen, but the more common thing to happen is they will have you secured at a local county jail. The jails are just better set up to actually house people and feed them and take care of them in that manner than a local police station's jail cells. Local police station jail cells are really meant for very short-term holds, really usually just overnight. So in a case where you're going to be held for the weekend, most times I would say they're going to bring you to the local jail where they're going to house you for those 2 days, and you will be transported to court on the Monday morning. This all brings me to the point to say that once you've been arrested, you are required to be brought to court at the earliest possible occasion. Okay, so let's talk about a slightly different circumstance. Mostly I'm alluding to this is happening at night, and quite frankly, most arrests do happen at night. But let's talk about the circumstance where it's the middle of the day, right? So maybe it's like 10 a.m. and you get arrested for whatever, right? In that circumstance, pretty much everything else I said is going to remain the same, except they're not going to call the bail commissioner, okay, because it's during normal business hours of the court. Instead, what they're going to do is they're going to go through the booking process like we talked about, and then they're going to bring you over the court that same day. So you, in that circumstance, you're going to go before the judge on the very same day you got arrested, assuming it's, again, like I said, during normal court business hours during the day. So that's really the difference between a daytime arrest and you're in a non-holiday. So in other words, if it's like July 4th and it's the middle of the day, you're still going to go the next day because the court's not open. So really, it's anytime the court is open, then you get arrested. They're going to bring you there as soon as possible. So they're going to do the booking process and then bring you over to court. All right, so I hope this has been helpful to make you understand what's going to happen when you get arrested, what you should do, what you shouldn't do, what you should say or shouldn't say. And quite frankly, other than basic biographical information, you shouldn't say much. Don't give them any more evidence than they already have against you. Allow your lawyer to fight the case out in court as opposed to fighting it out on the streets. And this process is going to go a lot more smoothly if you follow this advice. Now, for the next step in the process, which is the arraignment process, we do have another video that goes through all of that. And I invite you to watch that if you want to learn more about the arraignment process. And then the other components of the court process follow along in other videos as well.